What is up, everyone? Today we're going to be comparing the 98-inch QM8 mini LED and the R754, both from TCL. Great TVs, putting them head to head to see which one is worth your money.
Let's do it.
All right. Okay, so the first thing we got to do is make sure that both TVs are in the same settings so that we can have a fair comparison. We have them both in movie mode. Brightness 100%, contrast up, all the different settings are the same as you go down. We have both TVs set for local dimming on high and everything else turned off in those additional things like no contrast enhancing or anything like that. And then for the most part, we have everything else turned off except for the motion. So for that, I just had to get it to where I like to watch it personally. So both of these settings are at 4. If you want to have them somewhere else, feel free to change those, but this gives us an even playing field so we can see processing and upscaling and all that. And then both are on -5 for color, which will give us a nice warm feel to it. And when you get back to the home screen, you can see on the left, the mini LED definitely looks brighter. In person, it's not quite as noticeable as on camera, but if it comes to where we need to dim it down just to kind of see the different tone mapping and things on the TV, we can lower the QM8, but at the end, I'm really gonna let it shine and show you guys the differences. And we're gonna decide with some buying advice, is it worth twice the price? And on the home screen, the Google operating system, really awesome, but pretty much the same on both of them. I did notice when scrolling around that the QM8 is a little bit faster moving up and down, or if you just hold down the down button, there's a lot more on the QM8. And it just looks like it goes a little bit faster, and there seems to be more on the home screen this year in 2023 than the R754, which is last year's TV, so just not quite as much. But overall, I've been really happy with the R754 and its operating system, and just in general, happy with the TV. So definitely excited to show you something in the QM8 that may be even better, but again, is it twice as good for the price? So we're watching some SDR content, sports, cable news, all that kind of stuff. And we're talking about possibly dimming the QM8 down so that it wasn't overly bright. But in all honesty, when you're comparing these apples to apples on this SDR content, they're very similar. I mean, for the most part, the QM8 looks a little brighter, but not by much. It's only in some instances where you have full screen white that you see a little bit more out of the mini LED. Now, I think when we watch HDR movies, there's probably gonna be a lot better HDR impact from the QM8, but who knows? I guess you have to stick around for that. But on this, I'm very impressed. I've always been very impressed with the R754 with regards to its SDR, to watching sports, for its upscaling, all these different things. But I kind of feel like the QM8's doing a little bit better job of upscaling. Just in some instances, if you look really closely, you can see a little bit less pixelation, and it just looks a little clearer to me. We've kind of had conversations both back and forth, and that sometimes the R754 looks a little better, but for the most part, I'm thinking that the QM8 does have a bit better processing. Though again, I don't think this is something that would turn me away from this R754 that I've really enjoyed for quite some time. What do you think, Jen, for these two watching sports and cable and all that?
They both look really great, but I think the 98-inch size is really the wow factor here.
That's a good point, Jen. These are gigantic TVs, and I think people really want to know some major differences. I kind of want to see the blooming on these two TVs to see which one handles the light bleeding better. So let's do a couple tests real quick, and then we're going to get into some gaming HDR and give buying advice. So the first test is the dimming test, which I was most nervous about for the mini LED, because sometimes with more dimming zones, you may have a little bit slower algorithm, or it might be a little bit more complicated. But in this instance, the QM8 looks really good. The circles going around are extremely bright, and the black level is maintained quite well. And again, I was pretty happy with it on the R754, but you can see the circles aren't quite as bright, and that's indicative of it trying to do both bright highlights and keeping the black areas dark. It doesn't have as many dimming zones, so it's just more challenging. So overall, the QM8 is really looking good, and for a giant 98-inch TV, I'm quite happy with it. Now, good news and bad news on the Starfield type test. This is going to be more challenging for an LCD type TV in general because, it's not an OLED, it doesn't have pixel level control. But I see on the QM8, there is definitely a little bit of blooming and difficulty with regards to getting all those stars out perfectly. They're definitely brighter than on the R754, but on the R754, I never noticed really any blooming because it just couldn't get those highlights punched up as much. So what do you prefer? Do you prefer dimmer highlights and no blooming, or this mini LED trying really hard to get brighter highlights, but then showing a little bit of blooming around fast-moving objects like this Starfield test? Definitely let me know in the comments what you guys think about this. But seeing the little bit of reflection in the R754, because we had the ISO up a little higher, makes me want to get into a reflection test, so let's check that out. And so for this, we have two handheld lights that are really bright, along with increasing the ISO just to see what it would look like if you had some really bright lights on there. And as you can see, the R754 is a little bit more matte-like, and it doesn't dull the reflections quite as much, while the QM8 is a little bit more like what I traditionally feel like OLEDs are, or QLEDs, where it fights it off pretty well, but it's a little bit less matte, a little bit more glossy looking. Again, you have to let me know in the comments what you guys think about the handling of these. Both have a little bit of that rainbow effect, but it's not super aggressive. And I definitely think that I like the QM8's anti-reflective capabilities better. Let me know what you guys think in the comments on this. But lastly, we got to get to that dirty screen effect test. And when it comes to this DSE test, where you watch the hockey guy go back and forth and see if you notice any sort of dirt spots or uniformity issues behind it, it does look like the R754 is a little bit better in this test. Unfortunately, QM8 has a little bit of, dirty screen going down the middle, kind of just in general. It's got a little blotchiness to it. I don't think it's an unacceptable amount. It just would be nice if you're gonna pay $10,000 for a TV not to have this sort of thing. But history has shown us across all manufacturers that, it's pretty random and it could be better on your TV, it could be worse. I mean, you're just gonna have to check this out yourself or just not check it out. But this does come into play when you're watching sports full screen, or if you're playing video games that go left and right against a white screen, sometimes you'll notice this sort of thing. Again, panel variance is in play here, so yours could look better or worse, and I wouldn't judge it just on that, but I do think that the R754 looked a little better with regards to this test. But we need to get into some gaming because there's other things that people want to do besides look at testing on this, I'm sure, right, Jen?
Yeah, I'm falling asleep from all this testing. Let's get into the gaming.
So all right, so we turned on the PS5 with the Miles Morales, and right off the bat, it was weird because the R754 looked a little brighter, and we actually had to go in and check the settings because it had dynamic tone mapping on the R754 on, so now we'll turn it on the QM8 as well. So getting all the settings matched up, you can see that the QM8 again is a little bit brighter, but again, it's not significantly brighter. It's definitely not 2x as bright, and it's not even bright enough that we need to dim it down to show you this content. I mean, we can still crank up some of these other settings like the dynamic contrast and all that, but I think they're both great for gaming. The R754 has the two HDMI ports, 4K at 120. The QM8 also has two HDMI ports capable of 4K 120, and the one has 4K at 144, so if you want to hook up a PC, get a little bit more out of it as well. It's definitely not twice as bright in game mode, so if you're wondering, is it going to be worth that cost, we're going to have to talk about that in a minute, but the R754 is definitely holding its own. The QM8 does have this new game bar, which is pretty cool. A lot of these companies are coming out with this sort of thing, so I like it. Gives you kind of, specs at the top of what you're looking at, frames per second, what kind of game system you're using, is, VRR on or off and all that. And then you can adjust some of the settings as well for the game type you're playing, or more shadow detail, less, etc. So pretty cool that it has that. But overall, I think gaming looks great on both. And I'm probably partial to the QM8 just because it's a little bit brighter, but both are pretty awesome. What do you think, Jen? Are you having fun gaming here?
Yeah, Spider-Man's great and all, but it's no Lego Hobbit.
Well, it'd be cool if those were in 4K 120, but hey, why don't we use those for the reviews? But let's get into the HDR movies because I think that's where the QM8 is really going to shine, and then give some buying advice. So let's get on to that. So when watching HDR movies, I wanted to pick something that had some darker scenes in it so that we could really test the black levels versus the specular highlights and see if the mini LED and the second generation TV in general has an advantage. But when we're watching Avatar and it's in Dolby Vision, I noticed that it's a little bit better, but it's really difficult to distinguish the two TVs. Again, both of them look really sharp and really precise, but the R754 is very solid and the QM8 doesn't look a whole lot brighter. And I kind of feel like it's being held back a little bit, and I'm not sure if that's because Dolby Vision is enabled, but it is something that I want to check out. So I am going to take this and move it out of Dolby Vision and into just general HDR. And yeah, I guess I was right, because once you have it in just HDR10, you can see that the QM8 definitely is brighter now. So, Dolby Vision sometimes can limit your tone mapping, it can limit your brightness, it's trying to do its own thing. And I think that is in conflict with this QM8 a bit, because it was taking down the brightness and it made it look very similar to the R754. But now that it's just in HDR10, the QM8 definitely looks brighter. And again, I haven't limited the QM8 at all this entire video. So I think the R754 is doing great, but here you can see in HDR10, the QM8 is definitely a little brighter, a little bit more detail, and I'm really enjoying it in this mode. So where does that leave us? I still plan on making a final review on the QM8 because I know a lot of people are really interested in this, but my buying advice to this point would be that the R754 was something that I was very impressed with last year. I think it's a great TV. The only downside to me is that it lacks the really great specular highlights, but is the mini LED QM8 going to give you that all the time? I'm not certain. For the most part, it looked a little bit better here and there. It's brighter. The QM8 has a little bit better anti-reflective capabilities, but it has very similar processing. It has very similar brightness and SDR. The gaming might be a little brighter, a little sharper, and it does have the, one port that can game at 4K 144 Hertz and the new game bar. But until we got into the HDR movies, I didn't see a significant boost of the QM8 over the R754. So for twice the price as it currently stands, with the R754 being around $5,000, which is a great price for a 98-inch TV, and the QM8 starting out at $10,000, do you guys think that it's really worth 2x the price to get the mini LED? Or do you think you'd stick with the R754? That's something I'm very interested in the comments. I really hope that you guys respond and kind of give a little bit of help to other people that might be buying one of these two TVs. And to make it even more difficult, TCL just launched today the 98-inch S4. So now they're gonna have another 98-inch TV that's gonna come out at $5,000. So man, I don't even know, the R754 or the S4 or go for it with the QM8. Tough questions, and I'll definitely be looking in the comments to see what you guys say. And if you need a different size TV or you want to buy a TV in general, make sure you guys check out the TV quiz on BeTheInstaller.com. Goes over room conditions, viewing distance, kind of what content you might watch, and the link for that quiz is in the description below along with all these different TVs. So check it out and we'll see you guys in the next video.
Bye.